Photoshop sucks. It's laggy, it's buggy, and it's bloated. And did I mention it's $22 a month? So recently I decided I'm sick of using Photoshop. Let me try using another software. And I decided to pull out Clip Studio Paint. I've had Clip Studio Paint for several years. I got it for $20 like 4 or 5 years ago when it was like on sale. And recently I've been seeing other people using it. I'm like, you know what? Maybe this software is actually pretty good. So let's give it a shot. So anyways, towards the end of February, I started using Clip Studio Paint for a few sketches. So I ended up with something that looked like this when I was just messing around with all the brushes. I did have another file that I didn't save where I went through each and every single brush and tried to make a shaded sphere just to see how I can get the different edges of different tools to work and find which ones I like. The ones that I found that the brushes that I ended up liking were the Bit Husky and the India inks. I like the dense watercolor that gave a slight blending effect to it. And eventually I did figure out that playing around with the settings can really make a big difference. And then I also like the gouache brush as well. To add a nice texture to it. Playing with the settings makes a huge difference with the brushes. So that is something that I've learned. So anyways, I was playing around with different brushes to see what I liked and different colors and whatnot, just to get used to the program. And I came up with this sketch. I like the colors that I had going on, and I ended up painting in kind of a ground or mountain range landscape. I'm kind of envisioning this as an underwater scene. I'm like, okay, I like doing figure drawings in Clip Studio Paint because I just like drawing in it better. So I drew in a figure and I colored it in and added some light to it, and it came out okay. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but what if I add something else to the composition? And I added a dragon into it, and the sketch looks really cool. And it's something that I might go back and finish either in Clip Studio Paint or in Photoshop. Cool thing about Clip Studio Paint, it can read PSD files, so you can bring your Photoshop files in and work on them. But it can't read TIFF files with multiple layers, and it can't save TIFF files. So keep that in mind. If you want to work between different softwares, save it as a PSD, and that will keep all the layers together. And then the next day, I decided to do another sketch and just play around as just kind of a thing. This is before I decided to make a video on it too. Similar to the last one, I just had a bunch of random colors put down, and I kind of started playing and finding shapes within it. And eventually I settled on painting a mountain with kind of an orange and blue color scheme. And as I went, I decided, you know what, it'd be cool to flip the sky and lighting color. So we have an orange sky over here, but the orange lighting coming from over here. And we have blue sky over here, but the blue lighting's coming from over here. And I just like reflective water, so I painted it as a reflection, and I just tried to reverse the colors on each side. And I think it made a pretty cool painting. And I'm like, okay, I can paint with this. What happens if I want to do a study? So I did a portrait study. And this is what I came up with. Why a portrait study? Because I felt like it. It's still not, I wouldn't say this is a great study because I see problems with it. But I still like how it looks for the most part. I think this, I just went in with painting. I didn't do any drawing. And I mostly used the Bit Husky brush because it had a solid color to it. It didn't have any of the mixer properties to it, which I eventually do use some of that. And as I went, I just played around with different brushes that give different effects to it, especially with this background. And I think it made a pretty good study. So I'm like, okay, I can do a portrait study with Clip Studio Paint. Why not do a landscape study, which is something I should have done a long time ago to learn how to paint in Clip Studio Paint. So I came up with this landscape study. I'm not sure if more time would help it make it get better, or just doing more studies would make me get better. But overall, I was struggling really a lot with this one to just get the colors and the edges to look right. But I still hadn't figured out how to, or haven't realized that adjusting the brush settings was going to help my painting look a lot better. So this one actually started out as a quick line sketch. I might have recorded this one, but I don't remember. And then I painted underneath it, and I ended up with this. Some things to note is I like how the colors look over here in the less detailed areas, but as I try to do more detail and darker edges and more contrast, I was having a hard time getting the edges to mix just right. As I made this, I was at version 1.2, and eventually I do upgrade. I'm like, okay, I can paint a decent landscape at this point, but I'm still struggling. Why not just make a project and find something that I want to finish? So I started doing some thumbnails, and I came up with these thumbnails. I circled my 3 favorite ones, and I end up painting one of them, which is this bottom left one down here. So at this point, I was getting the hang of Clip Studio Paint, and I had my thumbnails ready to go, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to upgrade to version 5, because actually, I said I was going to upgrade to version 4, and then when I went to purchase it, version 5 came out, and it was half off, so I saved money and got the newest version. That would have been really annoying to buy the 4th version and see the 5th one come out. I got the newest version, and it had some features that I really wanted from the newer versions, because 4 had this too. Number 1, you could time-lapse your stuff, which I don't end up doing that for this artwork, which is kind of funny. And number 2 is I could import my brushes from Photoshop. And like, great, I can do that. So I import my brushes in, I play around with them a little bit. I'm like, okay, they work pretty much the same. The settings setup was weird, because you can have your settings and have different things turned on for you to look and adjust within the tool settings. But if they're checked off, they're not there. So some of the brushes that I wanted to adjust the opacity with, I just had to mess around in the settings to figure that out. So without further ado, let's get into the painting, and I'll talk about some features I like and don't like about Clip Studio Paint. Okay, so I move over my thumbnail to another document and enlarge it. Start messing around with my brushes to figure out which ones I want to use for this. And I block in my colors. For the most part, I use the brushes that I brought over. But if I wanted to blend some colors, I would use the default ones on Clip Studio Paint. So I use a combination of the ones I brought over and the ones already with it. So their brushes are good, they're just not what I'm used to using. And I think that was part of my challenge. I just wasn't used to it. And so with this process here, I blocked in the colors, and I'm kind of figuring out the different things I want to happen in this painting. Like, where's the light coming from? And I figured that out relatively early, and I still will have issues with that later on in the painting. And the composition changes quite a bit. The focal point, which is that mountain peak, will stay there, but the foreground will change quite a bit throughout this process. So you may notice that my painting's moving around all over the place. And yeah, that kind of happens with time lapses. But in this case, I was using one of Clip Studio's Paint's features that is slightly different than Photoshop. So in Photoshop, if you want to move the canvas around, you have to zoom in or change the window that you're working with, but then that hides all your brushes and stuff. But with Clip Studio Paint, you can move it wherever you want at any size that it is. It could be zoomed all the way out or zoomed further out, and you could still move it around. And I really like that because it let me kind of adjust to the position where I like moving my hand more. But unfortunately, that did cause me more problems when I was recording the time lapse, and it kind of looks like a big mess right now. So I don't know if I'll put something else in place of that, but we'll see. So I brought in my brushes. That is nice. I really like that. That is cool. It's easy to move the canvas. And one of the best things about Clip Studio Paint is it's a one-time purchase. I mean, I guess they have a subscription option, but I say just get the one-time purchase so you don't have to worry about that. I think currently 5 is like $62 or something like that, which is still a pretty good price. It's basically, that's less than what new games are coming out for nowadays. So it's well worth your money, I think. There are some issues that I have with it, which they really aren't that bad. Number one, the brush settings are confusing, and the tool settings and menus are confusing. But that could be I'm just not used to that. But I think some of the wording and verbiage for things is kind of odd, and I think that's just a translation thing, because Clip Studio Paint is a Japanese program, so English might have some odd translations with that. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but it seemed like every brush and every asset in it is basically called a material, and that makes it a bit confusing. That's just a minor nitpick on my part. But one thing that I wish they had is being able to click and drag different layers from different files to other files or other canvases or whatever we're going to call it. But you can't. You have to copy and paste, which is just another minor inconvenience. I know Photoshop, you can grab one layer and drag it to another picture or another file, and boom. Easy. This is a little more tedious to do that. And that's really my biggest complaints. Which is really not, those complaints really aren't that bad. Okay, back to the painting. You may have noticed that I changed the composition of the foreground a little bit. I basically took out some of the overlapping hills in front. I just felt like it was getting a little cramped there, and there wasn't enough room to actually breathe in this landscape. I just made it into one overlapping layer of grass, and I go back and change it a little bit as I go. But I just felt like it made the composition breathe a little better, and I could see more of the water here. I felt like it was a bigger scene. Another thing I keep trying to put in the painting is a figure, but I keep having a hard time figuring out the right pose for it. And I don't really want to look up a reference for a character, and then I have to figure out the lighting for them all over again. So I just kind of decided for this painting, I'm not going to put a figure or a character in here. Even though it does help with scale for a landscape, I just decided to cut it. Now, what do I have to say about Clip Studio Paint? It's good. And I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but it is a good program, and I would recommend beginners pick this up instead of Photoshop. Maybe get Photoshop another day, but really, they've been kind of brutal to the customer lately, so I'm just saying I don't recommend getting Photoshop for anybody that's getting into it. I'm just kind of ingrained to its tools and used to it, and hopefully someday I'll be able to ditch it. But since I do YouTube videos, I like to use it for making my thumbnails. And that's my main reason why I have it. But if I was just purely doing art, I would just stick to Clip Studio Paint. It has everything that you need. And it's only a one-time payment. Like, that's how I think all software should be. You should buy it, you have it, and end of story. I know things are weird with software, but that's a whole nother rant for another day on another topic completely. So I hope you enjoyed the painting. I still struggled with it. I could spend more time on it. There's always I always say that, but it's true. There's always a million things you can do on your artwork to make it look better. But eventually, it's just going to get boring and you'll get sick of it. So if it's not for anybody else and it's just for your enjoyment, do it until you think it looks good enough for you. And at this point in the painting, I do get a reference because I am a big advocate for using reference. So I might as well use it when I'm painting. So I have it tucked over to the side, trying to get some of these different shapes from this kind of mountain range here. Because I had some of the similar colors that I was working with. Thought maybe it could help me out. But for the most part, I really struggled to get that left mountain to look decent. Then in here, I decided to actually maybe give a little more depth to the background by making that waterfall, it become a waterfall instead of a river. And it also just gave it a little more context for the flowing water. It's still a river, it's just there's more waterfall involved. Because I like waterfall. And I keep going over my time-lapse recording and pulling up that bar, which is annoying. But what can I do? Maybe I'll just put this over the video instead. It'd just be kind of hard to line it up. I'll just let that finish painting. Actually, I'm just going to skip it to the end because it's basically me just going over a bunch of details over and over again. And that's where the time lapse ends, but I paint it some more. I will have that show at the end. But anyways, I hope you at least found that interesting. I thought it was a fun experiment, and I just wanted to take you guys along for what I learned about it. And until next time, Dartagon